Hello, everyone. Welcome to the International Theatre Critics Dialogue Series. My name is Bernice from the International Association of Theatre Critics Hong Kong. And you may all know that this series is supposed to be like a face-to-face version. But because of the pandemic situation that we all know, we postponed last year's series to this year. And of course, for this year, we cannot like communicate with each other in a face-to-face like platform. So for this year, we decided to have this series online. So we're very much welcome our special guest here today. Octavian is going to be our host for this series, and he's a very good partner and supporters of IATC-HK, and also Pawit. Pawit is a friend from Thailand, and of course, he's a very experienced theatre critic. And of course, we are going to discuss something that are really concerning. The topic of today's dialogue is called Finding the Silver Linings, Ecology of Theatre in Reacting to Crisis. So everyone knows about the pandemic situation affecting the humanities in many different aspects. And in particular for theatre, we're having a kind of change, how to face this crisis and what's the situation in Thailand and also in Asia. I think from Pawit's point of view, we should be able to know more about the situation, about the situation and the future development of also in Thai theatre and in Asia's theatre. So over to you both, and I'm looking forward to let you to know more about the dialogue. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bernice, for this introduction and for the generosity of allowing me to be a constant partner of IATC-HK in a series of projects that involve critical thinking and all the virtues of our profession that we need to uphold in the world that we live in today, most particularly. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank Pawit for the opportunity to have a dialogue that I think is quite necessary, in a sense imperative, about what is happening with theatre, with our profession, with culture in general, with the notion of cultural leadership, and what are the prospects for the period to come. Cultural prediction is almost impossible nowadays. It is indeed increasingly more difficult to know what is going to happen in the world. And it is this level of lack of predictability that is more concerning than anything else at the moment. So I'd like to begin by saying a few words about Pawit Mahasarinand, my dear friend from Bangkok, whose career in the area of criticism has been very, very vast, and his accomplishments speak for themselves. He is a teacher, an educator, he's a cultural manager, he is a leader of opinion, and he's above all, I think, a man of the theatre, somebody who believes in this art form, who encourages it, and who has acted in various capacities as an ambassador at large of Thai theatre. Personally, I was his guest at some point in 2017 in Bangkok for a lecture at Chulalongkorn University, and I could see firsthand how important it is to have somebody like him, somebody who is well-connected, somebody who has a vision, and somebody who understands the necessity of international cultural diplomacy. So maybe we should begin with this theme, Pawit. What is happening now with cultural diplomacy? What is happening with all this series of networks that we consider to be essential before and that are now called into question? And not only called into question, but perhaps threatened to disappear altogether. How can we uphold what we consider to be meaningful? How can we still continue to have these international relations? And how can we make cultural diplomacy matter in the world today?
Thank you very much, Octavian, for a very nice introduction. And it's I think during these days when your friends ask you to join a conversation, especially with friends you haven't met in person for a long time, you clear your schedule and you jump at that opportunity. So even though we cannot be together in the same place. I mean, we feel like we can be together in this a meeting application at the same time, and then we can listen to each other, and we can talk again, we can communicate again. And I think this is related to international cultural diplomacy. I mean, as you put it at the beginning. I think it's common for many countries to put public health first and foremost. I mean, for the past year and 7 or 8 months already, and so I mean, it's even before the pandemic, we all know that culture and arts are the first thing that the government would cut. Any government, I mean, around the world. So I mean, this is another reality check for many governments, for many countries. So you would, I mean, I think that explains what's happening in Thailand and many developing countries who have to put the majority of their budget into the pandemic situation control. And as you said, we still do not know what will happen next month, what will happen 2 months from now, or the next year. Will we have another variant of the virus, and would the existing vaccines be able to take care? So it's I think every country looks inside and take care of her people, I mean, first. And so there's a very, I mean, right now I think we heard this word very often, vaccine diplomacy. So now it's vaccine diplomacy instead of cultural diplomacy. But of course, international, as you know, international theater festivals, international dance festival, performing arts festivals, biennales have been cancelled and postponed, but some are still going on, and I think I was watching a video recently and said that, well, theater people know how to adapt. I mean, throughout the history, yes. When the church banned theater, I mean, we found ways to perform theater. I mean, in history, when government banned theater, we performed in apartments, in someone's living room, and then when the police showed up, it became a party. It's not a theater, so we know how to adapt. So this is a good test. I mean, this is a very important test of how we, like theater people, adapt to different situations and different conditions. But I'm sure that with the ongoing connection that is mostly online at the moment, I was recently watching BIPAM, which is Bangkok International Performing Arts Meeting, which is 100% online, like this year, and it was quite well visited by producers and presenters, especially in Asia, like from Korea, from Taiwan, from Australia, Singapore, Malaysia. And they had a nice meeting and then sharing of thoughts for a few days. Okay. So I'm sure that this will continue, and then cultural diplomacy will come back. And when we feel like traveling, and we feel like we can exchange, I mean, with the physical productions, I mean, with our physical presence again, no matter when that is. Yeah.
I really appreciate the thought about online connectivity as an alternative to the usual patterns and avenues of cultural diplomacy, because they have really proved to be very flexible under the current circumstances. And we have seen how everything that was previously about direct communication has turned into something else and has been shaped by this model of communication. However, there is something else that is happening in the world today, and I believe it's undeniable. There is a sharp contrast between the social situation in Europe and North America on the one hand, and in Asia and Australasia on the other hand. I'm not going to talk about Africa, Latin America, and other parts of the world because those particular territories are more troubled. But there is something that is happening. And I think it's almost as if a division, a separation is becoming more and more obvious, more and more apparent. And I was recently in Europe for Saiu International Theatre Festival, which took place in a hybrid format, but with a very, very strong physical component, to put it this way, with many different performances, with many different people. And it was an absolute triumph. And it was very reassuring for me, as somebody who has been connected with this event since 2004, to realize that it is very much alive, that it has survived this challenging test of its own durability, and now it's flourishing again. However, at the same time, I was witnessing people like you, like Bernice, not being able to take part in an international event of a similar magnitude. And I think that is something that is worth looking into and maybe touching upon in our conversation. This notion of people living more and more locally and understanding the international dimension of their activities in different ways. Do you feel that there is a risk, a serious risk of Asia and Thailand in particular being left out, being somehow marginalized because of all these social health-related factors that prevent people from traveling and prevent people from actually going to Thailand? What is your view on this phenomenon? And how do you think it can be overcome, or at least to an extent made a little bit more bearable for everybody on both sides?
Yes, you know, when I visit certain festivals, like during the lockdown, online, of course, I felt very lonely, because when we go to theater, we are part of a community. Yeah, we see people like who share the same interest, and then we see their reactions, their laugh, their cry, or even someone sleeping during the performance, or even snoring, or or drinking something that is not allowed in the theater. I mean, we miss all that. We miss this physical presence of the audience. And not only that, we miss cafes, I mean, in front of the theater. We miss like restaurants inside the performing arts centers that we go to. I mean, wherever we go, I mean, we're not only watching theater, right? We having coffee before the theater. We having dinner in between shows. We having a cake, right? It's a nice cake. There's always a nice cake somewhere in the theater. So I mean, this is all like it's all gone. So even though many festivals and many theaters have been trying to come up with ways to broadcast, I mean, the live events to us, like in remote parts of the world, it's not the same, because we cannot have we cannot have our coffee at that small coffee stall in front of the theater next to the box office. We cannot have a dinner like in between shows at the theater. We cannot take a certain buses or a certain subway or metro to the theater. That is all gone. I mean, it's not only what's on stage that's important, but the whole experience, which is very different. Which is different from watching a film. Yeah, because nowadays even before the pandemic, we have become, and many of us have become accustomed to watching film on our notebook. Like when we take a flight, we bring our notebook, and then boom, we can watch whatever we already download into our notebook, and that we are used to that. I mean, we don't have to go to cinemas all the time. Of course, like for certain movies, we want to watch it in a cinema, but for theater, it's just not the same. Yeah, and so I think when, and this situation, it really unfortunately, it really reveals the setbacks of how certain country value their arts and culture. Yeah. So
does it worry you? Does it concern you that things are pretty much opening up in Europe and North America, while they become more and more closed and enclosed in Asia?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about like Asia, I think the Olympics, the Olympic. I think, I mean, to a certain extent, the Olympics was successful in terms of like staging a big event, and there was not. So there's some hope in some Asian countries, but of course in developing countries like Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia or Philippines or even Myanmar, I mean, there are other issues to take care of. So in other words, in these countries that I mentioned, it's worrisome, because you really don't have theater performances, and if there are theater performances, it would be online theater performances, which are not the same, and even make people more lonely, and make people I mean, feeling like more like solitude, because you feel like you are alone, and then you have to watch a performance like in front of a screen, like by yourself, for the public safety reason. And then also because like I said, I mean, the priority for the governments of these developing countries, their main concern is the public health at the moment. So they cut almost all the budget for culture. And if the money that's left for culture at the moment, for many developing countries, and I think not only in Southeast Asia but in many parts of the world, they would support online performance, of course, but it's an online performance that is very low quality, and it's almost like, and this may be a little exaggeration, but I know that some artists did it this way. They just put a mobile phone, okay, in front of themselves, and then they perform something, and broadcast live on Facebook, and that is not the way like great artists would want to work. But that is the only way. When a government doesn't give them like enough support, when the government doesn't give them tools to learn more, to study more about the digital like requirement in order to make this online theater work. So yes, I am sure that the gap between the developing country and the developed countries who has like a huge surplus of vaccines now would be even wider, and that would apply for culture as well.
I understand your concerns, and I'd like to echo your thoughts earlier on. There are other issues to worry about in certain countries, and that is certainly true. And it invites another question, which is perhaps at an anthropological level far more meaningful. And that relates to the role of culture in society, which seems to differ more and more these days from Europe to Asia, from America to Europe, from Europe to Australasia, and so on. I gave the example of Saiu earlier on because my dear friend Bernice was there in person. You attended online twice, but I'm sure you'll have the chance in the near future to visit and discover the miracle of the festival. But the reason for actually mentioning the city itself now is rather different, although related. The budget for culture provided by the city of Saiu is about 4 times bigger than that of any other city in Europe. Usually the percentage is somewhere around 3%. In Saiu, it's 12% for culture. The revenue that cultural activities of different kinds provide is, however, even more substantial, to the point of being close to 18%. So there is almost a rentability of the cultural investment of the city. And that speaks a lot about the prominence, the value, and the meaning of a cultural program in an important European city. When I think of Asia, I believe things are very, very different. And I like to ask you, as somebody who has been right at the center of the cultural life of Bangkok, as director of Bangkok Arts and Cultural Center, as somebody who, as an academic, has looked into the various intricacies and the complexity of what culture means for the city, as somebody who has a lot of international experience, therefore a global perspective, perspective on this topic. Is the role of culture less significant in Asian cities than you perceive it to be in Europe or America?
It's always like that, yeah, because I think it's the issue of cultural management, yeah. And I think in Europe and America, they define culture as a way of living. But in many countries in Asia, for example, in Thailand, the Ministry of Culture spend more time and budget on the preservation of heritage. And then now it's in this difficult time, like economically speaking, it can get even worse when you talk about like a creative economy. So in other words, the government would support, I mean, mainly those kind of artistic and cultural activities that can make money, that can make profit and bring profit to the country. I'll give you an example. I mean, just a few days ago, in September, the Prime Minister, I mean, had a press conference, and he pointed out that he wanted to focus on 5F for Thai culture, and they are, of course, you can guess the first one: food. Second, film. Third, fashion. 4, and this is quite surprising, fighting. And 5, festival. So these are the main events that you would see, like get like more like government support in the next few years, and there will be more international Muay Thai boxing matches and festivals, and Thai films will get more support from the government, for example. Yeah. So I think this is partly, I mean, a consequence of the pandemic as well. Yeah. And then like those like visual arts or literature or theater would get less support. Okay. Unless
is there anything to do about it, Pawit? Do you think the battle is lost, or do you believe that still things can be turned in a way that is favorable for culture?
Well, if things can be turned, it would need some cooperation. It would need some collaboration, like both like local, like domestic collaboration, like between like artists and cultural workers and policy makers, like across the board. And also regionally, like within Southeast Asia and also in Asia. And then if we can, because I think in the pandemic time, well, thanks to all these meeting applications as well, we have a lot of online meetings, and then we meet like online, like people whom like we've never met again. Like we discuss like certain things, and I'm not sure whether this is a case for Europe or not, but in Asia, there are like new associations, new gatherings of people who are doing the same thing. But then like before the pandemic, they were just doing it on their own without feeling, I mean, the need to network with anyone. But now that they are facing the similar problem, the same struggle, they bond together and they found clubs or associations or something, and then they could bargain more with the government. So that I think that's a good sign. Yeah. So I mean, with all the problems, there are still some good signs. And I think you know, like as we theater people know, we never work alone. I mean, you do not like write a play, perform in it, direct in it, and design the lighting and costume and sound and all the effects all by yourself. I mean, you always need to collaborate with someone. Yeah, and I think we would see more need and more urgency, like for collaboration, like both domestically and internationally, and that would be one of the very few pluses of the pandemic, I think. Yeah.
I think that is true, but I'm afraid, and I make no apologies for this statement, that it might be a bit of an idealistic perception at the same time. And I'll tell you why. Because I have witnessed in various theatre communities which is to say some that are local and some that are global and kept together by a certain level of connectivity, that something almost inevitably happens in times like these. There are all these threats from without. There are all these people outside our field that are threatening directly or indirectly its existence. But there are also people from within that are questioning its importance, its relevance, its necessity for the society. And there are certain frictions that have become more exacerbated during the pandemic than before. I can give examples, but I don't think that is what matters. What perhaps should concern us in this conversation is the notion of solidarity within different communities that are based in the broad field of culture, theatre, performing arts. Do you think we have enough strengths in our solidarity to overcome this together? Or do you perceive the same disparities, the same conflicts, the same contradictions that I have witnessed in certain places, but also, as I said, in structures, entities that go beyond the boundaries of a particular region?
Well, I think one of the things, one of the lessons that we learned from the pandemic is that, and I think this is the lesson that we already know as a theater scholar and critic, is that we cannot do everything by ourselves. We need to work with others. And I think during the pandemic, it's more evident that people work across the fields like more. And also if you look at the audience, I mean, the fact that they have to go online in order to watch theater, it also means that they are working like online, right? They're reading books online, they are attending concerts online, they are going to the museum and exhibitions online. So in other words, they're using this space, yeah, I mean, without borders. And they're just crossing. I mean, I can open a theater performance in one window, and then a visual arts exhibition in another window. I can switch back and forth at will. Yeah, which I would never be able to do like in the real life. I mean, I cannot just go from a museum to a theater in like 2 seconds. Yeah. So I mean, I think when we consider this, there is more connection, especially, and there is more crossing in terms of the audience. And I think we should think about the audience more, like, and the changing behavior of the audience, and then we would realize. And then to get back to your question, yes, I still have hope. And I hope, I mean, I still believe that people need to get together. And I use an example that's happening almost daily in Bangkok and many provinces of Thailand at the moment. As you know, I mean, our politics is in trouble at the moment, and there are demonstrations, and a lot of people really wanted to come to the demonstrations, and not only like to voice their opinion, but there have been a lot of performances, I mean, as part of the demonstration as well. I mean, and some of them were staged by professional theater makers and performance makers and singers and musicians, because they just don't have a venue. And now they feel that by joining this demonstration, they have a stage, and they have a two-way communication. I think this is important, the two-way communication. They have the liveness of their performance, which performing arts like always need. So and then people would come. I mean, some only to watch like these performances and then leave like before the police arrive even. So it's become like a temporary theater or stage like during the pandemic. So I'm sure that and we can never predict like when the pandemic will be over. I'm sure that in Asia people would rush to the theater, and of course in many countries like theaters have already opened with physical distancing measures, of course. Yeah, I mean, we have to be part of a society. We have to be part of the community. That's our like human nature. We cannot be in front of a computer talking to someone and you don't know like where he is or in which country. We cannot do that every day, because as you know, you probably have classes on Zoom and online and other applications as well. After a while, you just need to see someone. We just need to hold their hands and to hug them. Yeah, we need that, and it will be, I think, sooner than we think. Yeah.
There is a thought that your statement reminds me of right now, and I've said it many times, and I apologize to those who have heard it before, but I think it's so meaningful and so poetically beautiful at the same time. And it belongs to Thomas Ostermeyer, who in a conversation like this with me said, it's almost as if two lovers are far away from each other. They cannot kiss, they cannot touch, they cannot make love, but at least they can maintain the illusion of being together. This is how perhaps we all feel about online teaching and online communication in general. I'm listening to you and I realize once more that you are an optimist by nature. It's something that I believe captures your personality. It's the feature.
Thanks to my home country. I think I had this anecdote to tell you. I was at International Exposure Dance Festival in Tel Aviv. And then I was taking it to a 5-star hotel, like near Susan Delal Center. And then because on that trip, I transited in Munich, and I bought a pack of sausages for my dad. Okay. And so I was looking into the room, there's no refrigerator. So I asked at the check-in counter, so could I put these sausages in the kitchen? And they said no, security reason. Okay. So what do I have to do? So they said that, well, I have to rent a refrigerator for $10 a day for 5 days in order to make sure that these sausages stay fresh. And after all the complaining, they asked me, where are you from? And I said, Thailand. And they said, oh, that's paradise. Because,
I think it's terrible.
Yeah, and it's like, because, as a Thai person, you never check into a hotel room where there's no refrigerator.
No, I totally understand.
It's common sense. Yeah.
Pawit, you mentioned this place of encounter, the international exposure at Suzanne Delal Center in Tel Aviv. And I remember I was there in 2019, December, and things were flourishing. There were people from around the world. The program was so intense. And I said to myself, this is so wonderful. And I was talking to a colleague from Israel who is the former artistic director of the International Exposure, whom you know very well, Rachel Grodzinovsky. And we said, we need to bring more people. We need to have more people focusing on this. And then a few months afterwards, we had a conversation online and we realized that indeed this type of communication opens up some possibilities that presence in a physical form doesn't allow. So this is something that confirms your views. It very much depends on how you look at things, how you position yourself in relation to a certain reality, how you understand its nuances and its implications. So I think your optimism is genuine because you know how to see, and I'm going to quote the title of our dialogue, the silver linings, how to see something that is good in a generally bad image. But there is a topic that cannot be taken lightly from the point of view of somebody living in Bangkok, living in Asia in general, living in the world that we're all a part of, to a great extent. And that notion is freedom. What is happening with freedom today and what is happening with the freedom of expression in the field of the arts? And I'm asking you because you are witnessing a series of social transformations in the social fabric of the Thai people, but also in this constant dynamics between the arts and the political power. So is there enough room for freedom in Thailand at the moment? Or do you think artists have pretty much given up and have accepted that everything they do is going to be pretty much controlled and restricted? That's something that I like you to answer as much as you can, given that there are certain topics in any type of conversation that have become very, very difficult to handle for all sorts of reasons.
Well, because of it's not only because of the pandemic here, but also because of the emergency decree, which can put you into, it gives like the authority to the police to arrest you and put you in jail. Sooner than the normal process or in the normal time. People are very careful right now about their expression, like online or in person. Yeah, and I think the divide, and actually the echo chamber, yeah, is stronger. Yeah, because before the pandemic, like we live many of us live offline than online, but nowadays we live most of our lives, most of our time online. And then the echo chamber, the algorithms of all the system only put us into the same groups as people who agree with us, or they think, or they would assume or presume that their opinion would correspond to ours. And I think that is not good for a freedom of expression, or it's not good for democracy at all. Because I think in a truly democratic society, you have to be in the same room as people who have a different opinion or even opposing opinion. But nowadays, because we have to live online, it's very difficult. And then speaking more specifically about the situation in Thailand, as I mentioned earlier, because the cut of budget, artists are even more careful, yes, of their expression, yeah, and they may have something to say, but they have to be very careful, because after all, they have to still rely on some support from the government, no matter how small that is. A very a strong, unusual, extraordinary, I should say, case. In early September, one of our national artists, which is the most prestigious position that one can get, in Thailand, and you get monthly salary as well, and all many healthcare benefit and many other benefits from the government, through your lifetime. One of our national artists was stripped of his title because of his political opinion that was expressed in his Facebook. And that's the first time in Thailand, and I think this only possible because it's during the pandemic, because they know that people would not they know that artists would not come out on the street or went to the Ministry of Culture and stage a protest, because the emergency decree doesn't allow you to do that at the moment. Of course, there's outcry on the internet, but then the government is now better with the internet as well. They know how to fight back, on the internet. There's even news about because we have a large army, and some of them don't have anything else to do. They are hired as special agents who would go online in different names and try to make sure that the algorithms of these online platforms favor the government. Okay, so this is one thing that's happening in terms of freedom of speech. But I'm sure, with the ongoing political protest, whenever the pandemic is over, more people will be on the street. Maybe we have a new government, a new election, and hopefully, if we have a minister of culture who really understands culture and the role of culture, we may after all have the silver lining. But then again, it's a long list of issues that need to be taken care of, especially in a country that is prioritizing the preservation of heritage over the contemporary living and welfare of people like Thailand.
But with the two examples that you provided in this conversation, I think mirror one another. On the one hand, you have this performativity of protests with artists going there and providing an artistic experience that is embedded in something that is of a different nature. And on the other hand, you have the artist who, for one statement on Facebook, is punished so severely and stripped of something that was earned through artistic abilities and performance. Now, I'd like to say that there is more and more a tendency, globally speaking, that favors a different approach, that encourages artists not to take a stance publicly, but to do it through their art. And that, of course, is a little bit more complicated than it immediately seems, because to do it through their art means sometimes not to do it effectively, not to launch that message in a way that could reach a variety of people in a direct, striking fashion. So whether or not that is a legitimate perspective, the question remains, do you think that in the society that you live in the Asian society in general, in the world society, however we define it, the role of the artist is that of providing awareness to the people in general, or is the role confined to the field to which the artist respectively belongs? In other words, should artists become more involved in this series of collateral activities that have a social, civic nature, or should they stick to what they are supposed to do, which is their profession?
I think it's more of the latter. I mean, the artists are more confined, I mean, to the kind of like stereotypical roles of artists, like in many countries in Asia. Of course, I cannot speak generally for all countries in Asia, because I mean, as you know, it's a huge continent. It varies from one country to another. But I think I've heard this notion, this sentence very often, that well, when you do theater, you just do theater. Make sure that it's not politics, it's theater. And I was like, because theater is about everything. It can be about anything in life, and politics is one of them. It can be about society, and it can be about public health. Like, for example, right now, I mean, it's not possible to live our life without a concern about public health. I mean, we have to make sure that we get our vaccines. We have to wear masks. I mean, at certain places at certain time, in the presence of certain people. So and we have to keep track of the number of the infections and people who were discharged from the hospital system. So it's the same, because well, even I'll give you this example. Even the classical theater of Asia, like for example the Ramayana, it's political. Yeah, it is political. I mean, it shows the good versus the evil. Of course, that's typical. But then again, look at the names. I mean, the name of the good guys are very similar, or even the same as the name of the kings in many countries. And even the names of the cities. Yeah, the cities are the actual cities that exist in certain countries. So it is very, very political. But then you have to think about it politically. I mean, I believe that everyone is political, and I think artists, I mean, are automatically, I mean, organically, I mean, political. I mean, as everyone. And I think it's I think art should have this role of promoting differences in opinion. In order to help develop a democratic society. And then I think we should be able to have a mind that is open enough, so that we can see a work by an artist whose political stance is the opposite to us, but we still can admire the artistry of it. Right. So but that's not the case. And that's not the case in Thailand. So in Thailand, a few days ago, there was even a case when a chili paste shop, like who has like one certain political stance, refuses to give an interview to a reporter who belongs to another wing politically. So even like, and we're talking about like chili paste. We're not like even like talking about arts. So I mean, so this is like echo chamber like all across the society. So I think arts should promote this, and I think critics like us can help promote this as well. Because I think when we sign on to this profession, we already know that we will agree to disagree. Yes, always. Yeah, throughout our life as a professional critic. And I think we should be able to instill this concept, this notion, to the general public as well. Yeah,
I totally agree with you, and I'm very pleased that towards the end of our conversation, we've introduced something that is directly or indirectly, implicitly or explicitly at the heart of it, which is the notion of critical thinking. And I would like to ask you, as somebody who has been in this profession for a long time, about its current status. Because if theatre has been diminished in its role and importance, I think criticism is on the verge of extinction. And it is up to us to a degree to maintain people's understanding of and belief in what criticism can mean for theatre and for the world in its entirety. So you think one of the roles of the critic is that of facilitating dialogue. Another one is that of encouraging this diversity of opinions that you have spoken about a minute ago. And also there is something that I like you to perhaps elaborate on a little bit more, which is the notion of understanding, of interrogating everything. And that is the supreme implication of critical thinking, not taking anything at face value and having the ability and the inclination to inquire about its nature, about its values, and about its implications and consequences. So what do you think is now happening with theatre criticism in places like Thailand? And what can we all do to pretty much resurrect it from oblivion and this state of this empowerment that it finds itself in?
Well, speaking of the theatre criticism in Thailand, well, because there's no theatre to see, and there's only some like online theatre performances, and some of them are of the quality that we all agree that we would not review it. I mean, because it's there are many conditions that the artists have been put into, dire conditions that we would otherwise wouldn't do justice to them and their work. So I think we expand our interest, and like for example, we recently had a workshop, online workshop, of course, and we invite senior critics from different fields to join a forum. So there's one film critic, there's one visual arts critic, and there's another one who's very, very versatile. He is writing on visual arts, on film, on Thai classical music, on Western classical music, and theater. So yeah, we have that forum, and then in the next session we invite the public to watch online performances of concerts, of theater performance, and visual arts exhibition. And then we were trying to draw like connections, not only between these online arts activities, but between them and the society and the world that we live in now. So I think as we mentioned earlier, I mean, theater people, I mean, critics included, know how to adapt to certain situations. We find ways to survive. We find ways to be relevant, and I think this is just one example. And I was recently on another. I mean, you know, it's a time I mean, this is a strange time and unusual time. I think in this time, if we take it like with some optimism, it's also a time for experimentation. Like we do something that we have never done before. We discover something that we never discovered before. I think in the past year and a half, I have discovered about 30 new restaurants not new restaurants, but I mean, because of the online activity and everything. And I just feel like I need to discover it. Just told my partner I need to discover a new restaurant a day. because of all the information we have online. So recently I was part of one of the 5 commentators, live commentators of a dance marathon organized by the Esplanade Theatres on the Bay, and it had 19 performances by solo performances by dancers and theater artists from 5 different countries around Asia and also Italy as well. And most of the 19 performances were live, and then of course the commentator had to do it live as well. So it felt like I was commentating on like a football match, yeah. And I had to do it like for almost 5 hours. I mean, there was only like 1 minute or 2 minutes like in between like performances, and it was fun. I mean, even though it gave me a backache, and as you know, the massage parlor here in Bangkok is only open for foot massage, and I need like the massage on the back, so it wouldn't work. But I mean, it's a new experience, and you felt like you have to be there. I mean, even though the producer said, well, you can have dinner, you can go to a toilet, but I felt like I really had to be there. So I mean, in those like 1 minute or 2 minutes, I managed to have a few cigarettes, okay, and went to a toilet, and that's it. And then I felt like I had to be there because you feel that there's someone somewhere who's doing this live, and you have to accompany them. I think this liveness, this two-way communication is what we yearn for. Yeah. And so thanks to this initiative, like by Horse Theatre Company in Taiwan, like we are all connected. And after talking to you, I have another Zoom meeting like with them and to plan on the next dance marathon to see how it goes. Yeah.
You know, Pawit, the fact that you're so busy with online things actually invites a different approach to our profession. And I'm going to try to highlight the significance of this paradigm shift by relating to the example that you provided earlier on. You said that you've discovered new restaurants, and the way to discover a restaurant today is to base your judgment and your curiosity upon the multiplicity of reviews provided in the online environment by people whom you don't know. Mm-hmm. And the process of reviewing has become so democratized and so widely available that it has become, by implication, devalued of its critical principles. On the other hand, there are activities like the one you've mentioned already, which is that of live commentating, which I presume involves critical thinking, but in a completely different way, and with radically different means of expression. So I put these 2 different examples in the same context, and I ask you whether you believe, like me, that theatre criticism should change, should move past the prerequisites of reviewing, and should try to reinvent itself so that it stays, or rather becomes, relevant for the moment. We need to embrace whether we like it or not. So what do you think? Do you think we should continue to think of criticism as reviewing primarily, which is, I believe, a very detrimental assessment, or should we try to encourage alternative practices that contribute to this broad redefinition of the profession?
Well, I always believe in the broad definitions of things. Yes, and I think my students know. Like for example, I'm teaching classes in transdisciplinary approach in performing arts, and this is my second year teaching this, and I've never told them what transdisciplinary is. And I think in the process we discover it together, because if you in this day and age, if you define something, especially if you are a professor, if you define something, your students would take it as a law, and that prevents creativity, that prevents development. Okay, and so I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I mean, criticism should be more than just reviewing. We should allow always new platforms where people can express their opinions. And I mean, we already had like digital disruption many years ago. So digital, I mean, we are now like we're living in digital age right now. So not I mean, if you go to a bookstore or newsstand, like how many newspapers, how many print newspapers do you see now? Yeah, how many magazines do you see now? Like how many people buy them like now? Like we have to adapt like all the time. And then as I believe that as genres of arts continue like to blend like towards one another, we should be thinking more towards arts. I think I'm more interested in art appreciation, like for the public now. So in other words, I think it's more important for the public to be able to enjoy arts and culture in general than just like read an expert opinion on a certain theater production. Yeah, and then I think there are some critics who are only commenting on the production itself. But then I always tell my colleagues and also my students that, I mean, even though like this is a like great piece of theater that came from France and it's staged in Thailand, you have to always analyze like why is it staged in Thailand? What is the relevance? What is the relevance like to people, to the audience? Okay, so then if you are trying to analyze that, it's inevitable for you to make connections to other things outside of theater. I mean, and it's the same as I mentioned, that it's not only what's happening on the stage that is important to us, theater people and theater critics, but also the cafes, right, in front of the theater, the restaurants, the people at the box office, and the bus driver and the taxi driver who take us there. So it's the whole ecosystem. So we have to always relate what we are seeing to the society and the community. So I think that's what I believe, and I think as many things continue to change, like very maybe more drastically than we expect. Like for example, this digital disruption, it's require us, I mean, to get used to it, to adapt, and only people who can adapt like can survive. Yeah, I think speaking about this, yeah, we are rewriting the statute of IATC like at the moment. I think one of the issue is that the definition of theater, whether it should also include dance or performing arts, and then I realized that the definition of theater varies from one country to another, or even from one person to another person, like these days. Yeah. So
luckily, we should add.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But Pawit, the fact that you recurrently refer to your students touches me very deeply, because it confirms my own belief that everything that we do matters, not only because we disseminate information, but because we find inspiration in this constant relationship that we have with students at various levels, undergraduate or postgraduate. And I'd like to end on this note by inviting you to comment on something that I think is of crucial importance to the survival and development of both theater and theater criticism. And that relates to their own interest in and passion for these fields. Do you find reassurance in the way they engage with theatre, in the way they exert their critical abilities? Or do you fear that they might become more and more disenchanted with what's happening to the point of giving up? Because we have to accept that there is a risk that in a world that is more and more materialistic, in which the artistic field is always marginalized, people might choose professions that are more rewarding financially or more stable socially. So what is your view on the attitude of the students towards theatre and, by implication, theatre criticism?
Well, in like starting from a country like Thailand, well, because we don't have a very strong theatre industry, or in other words, I can count with my two hands like people who only do theatre alone and nothing else and can survive. Yeah. Because there's no security like in a career as a theatre person in Thailand to begin with, even before the pandemic. So like students of theatre in Thailand already know that they have to adapt. So even though they are studying theatre, they can expect to do 2 months of theatre, and then 3 months of TV, and then 6 months of film, and maybe 2 years of flight attendance, and then come back to theatre when they want to change again. So they're trained to be flexible, like to begin with, and that I think that's important. That's important. That's more important than ever. Like you should always be flexible, because anything is possible. Like for example, we talk about in the beginning, we talk about the uncertainty of when the international travel would be allowed. And as you know, they are like international travel is now possible, but between certain countries. Yeah. So there'll be more and more conditions. So you just have to keep yourself open. Yes. And then I think you will have a good and happy career in theatre, like no matter what like theatre means. Like for example, even when I started writing about dance, I had like very little background in dance, but because the newspaper I worked for didn't have anybody to who wrote about dance. So I was like, okay, I'll try, and then I kept writing, and then like the more I write about it, the more I learned about it. So sometimes you learn like in your profession, in your career as well. But if I said no, that would be the end of it. That would be a lost opportunity. And then I think with all the struggles that we have at the moment, I think this is a time that we have to say, yes, I can. It sounds like Obama. Yeah, but yes, you can. Yes, more than ever. Yeah, because you never know what it would bring, what opportunities it would bring to you. And I was reading about the fact that many people would leave their office jobs like when the pandemic is over, because they are used to like working online. They're used to working like remotely from their homes or like cafes or places that doesn't feel like an office, and they have become like even more productive when they're not in the office, like for certain people. And that is very interesting, because the world is changing, but it's just like now more rapidly than ever. I think as we work in the theatre, we have to keep that in mind as well. Yeah.
I think this is really the ideal note to finish on, the notion of an ever-changing world that invites everybody to keep up with it. So thank you very much, Pawit, for this message, which is ideal for the end of our conversation. I'd like to say thank you also on behalf of IATC-HK, and to express my hope that our conversation has contributed a little bit to people's understanding of and faith in theatre and theatre criticism. So thank you very much. And let me thank everyone who has found time to watch us, and to invite them to stay with me during this series that will bring more international figures like Pawit into the cultural scene of Hong Kong through an online series of conversations. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.